Welcome to this session, Skills-Based Hiring, a Paradigm Shift for Educators. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Julie Lammers, Vice President of Government Relations and Advocacy at American Student Assistance. Today, we will be talking about the shift in skills-based hiring over the last few years, what companies are doing, how we can better prepare educators. With us today are a host of experts in this area, Mike Rubin, the principal of Uxbridge High School, Grace Sue, the Vice President of Education at IBM Corporation, Jake Hirsch-Allen, North America Workforce Development and Higher Education Systems Lead at LinkedIn Learning, Carlos Moreno, Executive Director of Big Picture Learning, and Patty Henry Leonard, VP of Strategic Partner and Business Development at Credly. Jake, I'm going to start with you, and let's level set the field a little bit here. Skills-based hiring is something that people talk quite a bit about. Love from your perspective to help people understand what that really means. And what you are seeing at LinkedIn as far as how this has changed over time and how you currently see it playing out with employment across the board these days.
Happy to. This is an area that I've been passionate about for a really long time, and I'm particularly excited that even during the pandemic, I think we've seen a dramatic increase in the use of skills-based hiring and excitement amongst employers in particular, who are by far the most important actor in this space, to the extent that if they're not bought into skills-based hiring, then even if the educators or the student are adopting the best practices or leading practices involved in this sort of relatively new field, the end result isn't going to accrue, right? They're not going to get the job with the employer. And so as more and more employers, and I think IBM is actually a fantastic example, do look to hire based on skills, not degrees, not the network that most people use to get a job. I think 80% of jobs we say at LinkedIn are more or less acquired as a result of one's network. And that, of course, results in a ton of bias. In fact, one of the major moves at LinkedIn right now is to try to overcome the bias that's associated with hiring based on either degrees, which often are, of course, associated with the reputation of the institution as opposed to the actual accomplishments of the student, or the network of the student, which can have absolutely nothing to do with their skills or competencies. And as a result, I think in terms of equity, but also really in terms of having a more efficient labor market, right? A more productive workforce that actually can drive economic development and social outcomes, we're way better off if employers can hire based on the actual skills that people, and that's why I'm particularly excited that more and more employers are moving in that direction, and post-secondaries and others are following suit.
So when you say more and more employers are moving in that direction, what specific skills are they looking for? Are there things that the education system can help train people better for? What are you seeing?
Absolutely. They're interestingly hiring for skills that are both sort of soft or human skills as well as hard or technical skills. And they're increasingly actually identifying both sets of those categories. So whereas before on the average job application, you would regularly have a list of technical requirements, right? You need to know this coding language for a software job, or even you need to know Microsoft Word for an admin assistant job. These days, we're getting beyond that to the point where employers are thinking hard about the human skills that they need as well, identifying those and communicating them better. And I think the real leap that we need to take is sort of to get beyond the thought leaders in this space, the IBMs, the LinkedIns, the Walmarts, and really actually get to the SMBs, right, that make up a huge proportion of our labor market. And once those small to medium-sized businesses are similarly able to communicate what skills they need from a human or a technical sense, and then hire based on that, we're going to end up with a much more, as I said, inclusive and productive workforce.
So how do you at LinkedIn help small businesses think that way, or medium-sized businesses move in that direction? I know, recently looking at your LinkedIn profile, the first thing that popped up was all of your skills. But so how do you help, solve this problem for small and medium-sized businesses?
I think the first thing to do is sort of to walk the walk ourselves, right? To hire based on skills, even within our workforce at LinkedIn and our parent company, Microsoft. And so we've got, for instance, a project called Project Shine right now that we're running both internally and with a few other testers. I would even call them alpha testers because we're not quite at beta yet, wherein the companies that are hiring, including LinkedIn, do so based on a variety of assessments that are done based on training that we recommend. And if the individual achieves well enough on those assessments, they're guaranteed an interview. And I think that is a leading practice for lots and lots of companies to adopt, instead of starting with who the person is or looking at a CV, which often results in discrimination based on their name, let alone what they look like or who they're connected to. Start with what do you need in terms of competencies. And if the person achieves on an assessment of those competencies, then guarantee them the interview at a minimum, and ideally even more than that.
And so help us understand how you see the balance between sort of traditional education, the bachelor's degree is that minimum, and this idea of moving more towards skills. We're not saying one is not valuable, or that we should only rely on skills, but how do you help companies understand what that balance should be?
Interestingly, I think we can actually say we should only rely on skills, but that doesn't exclude degrees by any stretch. To the contrary, a degree is a representation. It's a form of recognition of skills, the same way that a badge is. I founded this organization called the International Council on Badges and Credentials because there's so much confusion around what the recognition of skills looks like that I think it's worthwhile breaking it down below the level of a degree. That said, you should be able to stack, right, add up all of these different micro credentials or just recognition of different skills that a person has. Because I worked on this project, I volunteered here. Even for some individuals, I love the idea of skills recognition completely separate from the area of sort of academia or formal learning, to look at areas like the skills somebody acquired at home, right? Part of how we can try to right the massive imbalance that the pandemic has created, or exacerbated, I should say, in terms of women's roles in society, is to start recognizing some of the skills that they are using and benefiting from, that society as a whole is benefiting from at home. Or another great example that I like to refer to comes from sort of the world of newcomers, is what we call them up here in Canada, but I think in the States of immigrants. Those individuals often, for instance, if they're a refugee, faced lots of hardship. They took their families across multiple borders, and the skills they learned, the resilience, the project management, those are skills that could be represented either on a LinkedIn profile or via badges in some other format.
That's great. So let me turn to Pat. So Pat works for Credly, which is an organization that really is working to try to help employers understand the value of some of these skills. So Pat, just broadly, can you just tell us a little bit about how Credly works and what is it you're aiming to do?
Sure thing. In this time of all the things that Jake just framed, it is that pivot towards a skills-based hiring practice, mostly responsive to the changing world of work, where gone are the days of a very discrete or binary description of a particular job role, rather the variety of skill sets that someone needs to be able to have to do a particular job well today and be prepared to pivot to make the turn to the next job that they want to be able to go after, is less about framing things in job titles and more about the skills underneath. And more to that point, it's not just the self-reported, I think I'm really good at fill in the blank, but rather verified skills that says, what do I know and what can I do, but says who. So historically, we've relied upon the academic institution to be able to be one of the most trusted, relied sets of signals that are out there of one line in a bachelor's degree or another degree to say I'm a bachelor of computer science or business administration or something like that, but provides no transparency about the devil in the detail of specifically what do you know, what can you do, verified by, and how did you acquire those particular skill sets. So many of those kind of that pivot that to help hiring managers with better tools to be able to not only discover those individuals who have verified skills, verified by a third party, not just self-nominated, but also to empower the individual themselves to disclose. So it's both a discovery on the employer side and a disclosure part on the part of the individual, putting a tool in their hands, and that's where a digital credential comes in, that enables them to be able to control the communication of their capabilities, being able to do so without having to go to the registrar's office or dive into a performance management platform and extract it from a database or a certification record, but being able to advocate for yourselves. And that's with that changing world of work, so is the changing role of the individual, where they more and more are becoming a department, an HR department of one, if you will. So how do we help them, help issuers identify and get very detailed in describing the skills that and how they acquired those skills, but put that in the hands of the individual so that they can be able to advocate for themselves in an accurate and articulate way in the infinite white space of a digital credential, where you can get really detailed about the rigor of the experience and what exactly I did to earn this recognition.
That's great. I think one of the things that we're constantly talking about at ASA is this idea of, we want to ensure that kids understand all possibilities in front of them as far as education and what that career path might be. But what we run into is the conversations that kids don't understand the value of what some of these education paths are if it's not a bachelor's degree at the end, because they have gone through the system where they see employers only valuing that. So how do you help employers communicate or even convince employers that this is the path that they should go down, including in addition to what Jake said about all of us walking the walk and just making this the norm. How do you start that process of getting more employers like the IBMs of the world to think in this way, that it can't just be bachelor's as the default, but there are other opportunities and other systems that are as valuable and can provide some really good information to understand the skills that these employees may have.
Yeah, I think that employers, whether buoyed by commentary from the Business Roundtable that really speaks to the responsibility of the organization, kind of that pivot, the pendulum swinging back into the space of organizations having a little bit of the not only corporate social responsibility, but social responsibility. And we see a number of these kind of programs in Amazon's career choice programs and some of the work that IBM is doing, where employers are acknowledging the fact that the investment in developing skills, but also having a skills-based taxonomy to be able to engage people and help them map out their career pathway works, whether or not you are initially upskilling someone, reskilling into a new particular role, outskilling, meaning you're preparing them for the next job beyond you as an employer. So I think employers themselves are now coming to that fore that says, I need more specificity. Give me a tool to be able to understand in context, because there are great core skills that we see in communication and design thinking, critical thinking, et cetera. But understanding the context in terms of how did someone acquire those particular skills, give me a means to be able to understand that, which is detailed within a digital credential, so that I, within my own organization, can do my own job task analysis. I mean, that's a very traditional process that employers do, but the rigor with which they're refining that down to the skill level has increased simply because it is hard to find that needle in the haystack. And being better at defining what is that skill set that you're specifically looking for is incumbent upon the employer to make sure you've got the right match.
That's great. So let me pivot to Grace. We've talked a lot. IBM has come up a few times today for good reason. I think it was about 4 years ago, IBM made the commitment to do a big switch towards skills-based hiring, in addition to a really big commitment to training and education. First, let's just start from the employer perspective, why IBM felt that this was a necessary next step as an organization, as a business to undertake. And then we can talk a little bit about how you are socializing that, as well as helping train the next generation of IBM employees with the PTech program. So let's just start from the corporate perspective, why you believe that this was a really big and important move to make.
Thank you, everybody, for all the shout outs. It's wonderful. And, this is really something that's company-wide, and IBM is a big company. We have 350,000 employees, and we're working within our own company to really rethink hiring, but also trying to steward and encourage thought leadership across the private sector. So, I think this comes from two different areas. One is companies are competing for talent. There's a talent war out there. Everybody needs the best talent in order to be competitive and to be innovative. And companies are realizing that there's not just one route to get the best talent. It doesn't have to be school, then college, then work. That there are other avenues for workers and leaders to join a company. And I think what companies also are realizing that if they're going to be innovative, they have to be more inclusive. They need diverse perspectives, diverse experiences in order to be able to create really comprehensive solutions that address some of the biggest challenges that other companies are facing and that we as a world are facing. And a third point I'm going to Pat is this increasing awareness that companies exist within ecosystems, and we live in a bigger world, and we have a higher responsibility. And I think the Business Roundtable's renewed vision of what a company is responsible for is a tremendous example of that shift, that they're not just responsible for shareholders, but they're responsible for employees and for communities as a whole. So I think there's these, the need for talent to be competitive, but also an understanding that we're all part of this larger ecosystem for everyone to be able to succeed. in order to change our hiring practices, it's really been about leadership, the top echelons of the company saying, we're going to do this, we're going to make this change. And it's not just about stating that we're changing hiring practices or hiring requirements. It's really taking the steps to rethink, what does recruiting look like? What are the kinds of assessments that we're going to be put in place in order to be able to attract diverse talent? Really also thinking about programs that we put in place from an HR perspective, from a corporate social responsibility perspective, to attract the best talent. 43% of IBM's job postings right now don't have a requirement for a degree. It's just all about skills. And what we're doing is we're implementing apprenticeship programs. We've got tech re-entry programs. We have our high school reform work that we're implementing, and we're now launching a new adult upskilling and reskilling platform, completely free, that's designed to target adults from non-traditional backgrounds to help them get well-paying, competitive jobs in STEM industries.
That's wonderful. And so let's shift a little bit about how you are then working with schools and communities to train folks to really have the skills necessary to get a job at any place, but hopefully IBM. And talk a little bit about your PTech program, what that looks like, and why the company has made such a commitment to the skill building and workforce development of high school students.
Yeah, well, we know that, as you said, change doesn't happen overnight. We need to start with, we need to start at the earliest ages to really begin to develop and nurture the kind of talent that we need to work at our companies. And there used to be this idea where you would wait and see who emerged from the talent pipeline. And industries are now realizing they really need to go into that talent pipeline and help to nurture talent of the future. One of the ways that IBM is doing it is through our PTech school model. PTech is a grades 9 to 14 model. So rather than the traditional idea of high school where you go for grades 9 through 12, we extend it through grades 14. So students are earning both a high school diploma and a no-cost associate's degree. And it's not just any associate's degree, it's one that is recognized by industry. It's all about partnership here. It's high schools, community colleges with industry coming together to ensure that students have a very seamless pathway from high school to college to work. So high school and college coursework is integrated like early college models, and industry is there to provide workplace experiences. So mentoring, worksite visits, project days like hackathons. And then when students are being exposed to these kinds of skills, they get to apply them in skills-based paid internships as soon as they turn 16 and have some college credit under their belt. And as Jake was talking about, what we're doing is when students graduate, they are first in line for jobs. Not a guarantee of a job, but it does mean that they get an interview. And that's tremendous to be able to present yourself to a hiring manager and explain your skills beyond your resume. We're seeing graduation rates 3 and 4 times the national community college graduation average. We are now in more than 240 schools across 11 US states and 28 countries. There's more than 600 business partners involved. And I think that speaks to the fact that industry is realizing how important it is for them to get involved in these kinds of initiatives and nurture the talent of the future.
That's wonderful. Thanks so much, Grace. So with that, I'm going to turn over to Carlos Moreno, Executive Director of Big Picture Learning, which is a nonprofit organization that really supports schools and district leaders to create a high quality, sort of non-traditional type education environments, very much linked to work-based learning and skill building. So I'd love you, Carlos, just to talk a little bit about the Big Picture Learning model and how do you think we can help educators shift to ensure that they are really focusing on skill building. Clearly, that's what employers are looking for. Jake and Pat and Grace would say that's what the type of hiring we need to be doing, and we need to make sure kids have those skills at the ready and then can clearly articulate what they are. So how does Big Picture Learning fit into this, and what does the model look like from your perspective?
No, I appreciate it, Julie, and it's great to be with everyone here. I'll start off just by respectfully correcting an idea that's been out in the ethos about big picture learning, and that we're work focused. Having students land in professions that are deeply relevant to them is certainly an important byproduct that we and our schools aspire to, but we're truly learner focused first. and career focused a bit further down the line. I'll also push a bit further than just skill development, which can feel rather technical and reductive, and especially in the context of schools, and can be interpreted as treating teachers like widgets or gears within a larger system. But we know that teaching is profoundly human and profoundly human action. And it makes me think of the James Baldwin quote where he shares that a teacher who is not free to teach is not a teacher, and that a true teacher deals with the hearts and minds of young people and must absolutely therefore be prepared to go for broke. That would mean for us, as we interpret that, is that skills-based hiring might be necessary, but it's also not sufficient. And to go beyond, we believe that we need to look at knowledge, skills, and dispositions. Teachers should have knowledge about the students, the families, the communities that they serve, as well as some knowledge about the complex job market that young people will be entering into after graduation, so that they can be just like totally like they can structure their learning experiences accordingly. And yes, they should have the technical skills. But it's worth mentioning that one of the challenges of teacher credentialing programs as they currently exist has been to make sure that they are in compliance with all of the skills training that are mandated by various authorities, which means that the training winds up being rather technical, often a bit stale, and focus more on the what and how, but not the why, which is what the big picture does, which takes us to this idea of dispositions. Schools should not feel clinical in its approach. Students need to know they are cared for, that they need a sense of belonging, and to feel that their education has purpose. And in order to do that, they need teachers to develop profoundly human relationships with individual students and to create a culture in the school. And to do this effectively, it's a bit more than the technical skills. Educators need to demonstrate caring and compassion in their practice. A little bit about our methodology and how we do this: we simultaneously think about both individual student learning experience and how to make them deep and productive learning experiences that matter to students individually and personally, and could lead to family sustaining careers and jobs. So rather than starting with what are the projected job markets for 5 to 10 years after a student's graduation, and then kind of reverse engineering educational systems to churn out the right products in the form of young people with particular skills to fill slots, we acknowledge that the 21st century is a much more dynamic and emergent landscape where people are more likely to move from job to job, even industry to industry. Therefore, specific technical skills we feel is less important, and more important are transferable skills and orientations towards learning. Young people should learn how to learn, communicate effectively, problem solve, think critically, collaborate with peers and adults, and engage in self-directed learning. It's a little bit about kind of our approach and our methodology. So.
No, that's great. And maybe I'll bring in Mike Rubin here as well. Mike is the principal of Uxbridge High School in Uxbridge, Massachusetts, which is a fairly small community on the Rhode Island, Massachusetts border, Blackstone Valley. So Mike was the Massachusetts Principal of the Year last year, and partly because of the ability to bring some of this thinking to a fairly small high school. And so, Mike, I'd love for your perspective. I think Carlos has given us sort of a very clear perspective of how educators should be thinking about this, and the idea of learning how to work, not necessarily learning for work, and all of the vital skills, whether they're, ASA did a research report on new foundational skills, and this idea of what are the types of things employers may be looking for that we need to better prepare students for. Just love your perspective, Mike, on how you think these things are happening in public schools in throughout the country. How can we help to support educators more in sort of implementing Carlos's vision of what it should be, and what are you doing in Uxbridge to make that happen?
Well, thanks, Julian, and thanks to the other panelists for framing anything I could possibly say, because truly it's very consistent with some of the things you've already heard. Part of what we've tried to do is abolish terms like 21st century skills. I mean, we're 20 something odd years into the 21st century, and we talk about things that are essential. We talk about, we do use the term soft skills sometimes, but that's more in line with what is essential. And there is a technical component, depending on, at our school, we have a number of pathways based on some credentialing at the end, based on student interest. But we embed those other skills, the ones that we consider essential, into all of our coursework. And we give teachers the flexibility to really live and breathe those skills through their content. And you can, as that pendulum swings from content to skill, we want both to be important. And we acknowledge that, educators, for the most part, are teaching in a subject because they love that subject. And we don't want to take that humanity out of what they do and what they love. But we also want students to see some consistency in how we define those skills across different disciplines. And with the understanding that you don't necessarily teach collaboration by a standalone lesson on collaboration. It's something that is embedded every single day in how you design what you do and how you do it with students. And probably more important than that, as we look to merge that consistency between the technical and the soft, it's that it's done very deliberetely and purposefully as a school community, so that students see it as a continuum. We're fortunate enough to have our 8th graders. We start our kids in 8th grade at Uxbridge High School, and we start all of them in a career exploratory program where they are able to get a sense of who they are, what they are, and how they learn. Because the last thing we want is for a student to walk out of here as a senior, go into some sort of preparation program at a college or otherwise, and waste a lot of money or time because they don't have a lot of either. And the other part of it that I think is particularly really, as I heard some of the other folks identify, is that ability to self-advocate what they are successful with, but more importantly, what they're not. There are some students who are not particularly good per se at a particular skill, and for us, that's an opportunity. We don't see that as, well, you were never particularly good in art class, so you're never going to take an art class. We actually see those as opportunities to help students fill gaps, become more whole.
Yeah, that's great. And so maybe this question, maybe to both Carlos and Mike, how do you bring employers in to the conversation about how we should shape education, so that employers are sort of getting what they need while still, figuring out a way to engage students, educate the whole student, keep kids interested and loving to learn. But what is the responsibility? What is the role of the employer community in helping to drive some of that? Maybe start with Mike and then Carlos.
They're in our building, and they're in constant communication with our teachers. One of the things that I'm really proud of from a lot of our educators' standpoint is that kids don't ask the question, why am I doing this? When somebody from the outside has validated that work with some truly authentic purpose. To share a quick anecdote, last year in one of our engineering classes, one of our work partners gave our students a challenge and said, we need this particular problem solved. And we had a student who worked it through with 4 other kids, all the way through from nothing to pricing and prototyping and finding the raw materials. And it happened really, really organically. And I think that, to me, was really awesome because I just made the connection. I just said, hey, they have a project, you're teaching this class, go.
That's great. That's wonderful. Carlos, what is your perspective on that?
Yeah, no, right on. Exactly with what Michael said, I'll share. And this is based upon observed experiences across the communities in which big picture learning schools exist. It only takes a handful of successful internships for things to kind of click back into place and to begin fostering that community, that broader community outside the school walls. Once a member of a community experiences a successful high school intern, they're more likely to welcome another. And what's more, they're more likely to suggest to fellow mentors and professionals within the community that high school internships are invaluable and that serving as a mentor can be incredibly inspiring work. There's no question that when schools are in their first or second year of kind of this work, introducing themselves to the community and selling them on the idea of high school internships can be a bit of an uphill climb, but after that, the impact is totally exponential. And I'll just say our work begins with the schools often who are interested in finding ways to put students at the center of their own learning. And asking those hard questions like, do I know about my students' individual interests and talents? Do I help my students understand how learning contributes to our community and to the world? And can my students learn things in an order that fits their own learning styles? And who are the mentors that can work to support them in this journey?
That's wonderful. Well, we are unfortunately at time. So I will just wrap up and say, personal plug here. ASA is just in the process of finishing some research around high school internships. So that should be out available shortly with work ASA is doing with Bellwether Education. So look for that. I would encourage anyone that would like to learn more about our panelists today or the wonderful programs that they work with. All of that information it will be posted in the chat. If you'd like to learn more about ASA, please visit our booth at South by Southwest EDU. And thank you all for joining us. It was a great conversation, and looks like we've all got a lot of work to do in this area, but we're all seem to be moving in the same direction and in a good direction. So thank you for everything all of your organizations are doing, and everyone have a wonderful day.